My name is John Hanna. I'm a senior fellow here at FDD. Delighted to be moderating the discussion this morning, not only because of the subject matter that we're dealing with, which is very important. That is the future of Lebanon, something that's been near and dear to my own heart for quite a long time, but because we've also managed to assemble a really stellar group of experts to lead us forward, all of whom happen to be very dear professional colleagues of mine whose expertise and insight I've long admired and certainly benefited from enormously, both during my time inside and out of the government. I think it's fair to say that other than the Syrian people themselves, no other country in the region has more at stake in what's happening in Syria today than Lebanon. Of course, it was the rise of the Alawite-dominated Assad family dictatorship that has had a huge and even decisive impact on the making of what passes for the modern Lebanese state. And it's almost certainly the case that the unraveling and eventual collapse of that dictatorship will have an equally profound effect on shaping Lebanon's future. But what precisely are those effects likely to be, and what do they portend for Lebanon, the future of the broader region, and for U.S. interests? With all eyes over the past 15 months focused on Syria itself, most of us have only caught the occasional glimpse of how things are actually playing out in Lebanon, the occasional headline here or there, but most of it's still very much on the margins of our attentions and focus through a glass darkly, as it were. Well, today we hope to remedy that a bit, to shine our spotlight directly on the Lebanese arena, to enable us to drill down a bit, to better understand the facts on the ground, the risks and dangers that we face, and how they might be mitigated and managed. Because the fact is, at least to my mind, that Lebanon is ground zero for the spillover, or the potential spillover, of the Syrian crisis, the place where a horrific but so far largely containable internal conflict is most likely to be ignited into a broader, bloodier, and far more dangerous regional conflagration that poses a real and present danger to international peace and security. It is Lebanon is very much a witch's brew where all the ingredients for a potential disaster come together in one very messy package. A weak and fractured state, boiling sectarian tensions, rising extremism and fundamentalism, Hezbollah's arms, Iranian ambitions, an increasingly desperate regime in Damascus seeking to survive, Israeli concerns and insecurities, and lots of weapons, including, of course, the risk of Syria's chemical and biological arsenal and ballistic missiles falling into the wrong hands, whether by design or by accident. Now, to help us sort through some of these circumstances and scenarios, and whether or not the center, such as it is in Lebanon, can hold, we're very pleased to have with us three really outstanding experts. I think you've all got a copy of their bios, so I'll make my introduction brief. First speaker today is Amal Mudallali. Amal is currently, most recently, a scholar at the Wilson Center here in Washington, but for years we've all known her as one of the chief foreign policy advisors to Lebanon's former Prime Minister Saad Hariri, and before that to his late father, of course, Rafiq Hariri. Next up, we'll have Hassan Mneimneh, a fellow at the German Marshall Front currently, but previously with the Hudson Institute, the American Enterprise Institute, and the Iraq Memory Foundation, whose work on democratic transitions and fighting extremism and the rise of radicalism in the Middle East has been very, very important and path-breaking. Last, we will turn to my great colleague here, Tony Badran, a fellow at FDD and an incredible authority on all things having to do with the Levant, whose weekly columns in the online journal, Now Lebanon, are definitely must-reading for anybody seeking to understand current developments in that region. The way this will work today is that I'm going to ask each of our speakers to provide a few minutes of introductory remarks. I'll then follow up with some questions of my own to get the conversation going, and then we'll open it up to all of you until I have to bring the discussion to a sharp close at 11 o'clock. Let me remind everybody, tapes are rolling. This is all on the record. And with that, let me hand it over to Amal.
Thank you, John, and thanks for Defense of Democracy for inviting me. And it's really a great pleasure to be here with three of my good friends and two of the most important experts on Lebanon. That's why you see I prepared. They didn't prepare anything, so they don't have to. I'm speaking here on my personal, in my personal capacity, and I will talk. Sorry. I will give an overview of the situation in Lebanon as I see it now, and whether this means Lebanon is descending on the civil war, and I will let my friend and colleague Hassan go into more in depth of the, especially the situation in the north and the Islamist movements and stuff like that. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. I just want to start by talking about the internal situation now. As you see that Lebanon now is again in the news, and Lebanon now is everybody is speculating that Lebanon is descending into a civil war. Actually, my mentor and former boss, Nahar publisher Hassan he wrote a book and called it "The War of Others" about Lebanon, about the 1975. Everybody today in Lebanon is afraid that this might be the beginning of something similar to 1975. I'm going to argue that Lebanon is not sliding into a civil war, and we're not going to witness another 1975. I hope, but I think because there are so many reasons for that. The most important reason is that there is no party in Lebanon that's now it's in its interest to have civil war in Lebanon, especially the party that has the most weapons and the most power in Lebanon, Hezbollah. It's not in its interest now to have a civil war. I'm going to argue that the situation in Lebanon now is more similar of 1958 than 1975. And I'll explain why. In 1950, I will put it in the regional context. Once again, Lebanon is caught in the midst of a regional confrontation. The Syrian-Iranian axis has its internal Lebanese partner in Hezbollah that's holding the levers of power in Lebanon and facing off with the democracy pro-Western movement, which, unlike 1958, is not in power but in the opposition. This axis supported by Russia. In 1958, that axis was supported by the Western axis, while the United States and the Soviet Union was supporting the United Arab Emirates and the other axis. This international or regional confrontation or standoff is compounded by a very complex internal Lebanese situation. The two major sects in Lebanon, the Shiites and the Sunnis, both they feel targeted. The Shiite community, especially Hezbollah, believes that it has been targeted since the withdrawal of the Israeli army from Lebanon. They point to the 2006 war, to the STL, Special Tribunal in Lebanon, to the call to disarm that it's a proof that the Western Arab Lebanese plan is targeting the party and its community. In yesterday's newspaper, Al-Jumhuriyah in Lebanon, there was a very interesting article talking about how Hezbollah is very nervous, and Hezbollah is trying to put all its weapons together, its strategies for the situation in Lebanon. And they quote a member of Hezbollah's members of parliament of Hezbollah, saying that there is a Western Arab agreement to weaken us and to break us if their plan succeeds, to drive us out of the country and out of the south and put us out of the confrontation with Israel. The Sunni community, on the other hand, is angry and feels targeted also. And the streets and the violence that we saw in the streets in the last couple of weeks and months is a testament to that simmering frustration within the Lebanese community. They speak of the alliance of the minorities between the Syrian regime and Hezbollah. as targeting them. The Sunnis don't think of themselves as a minority in Lebanon. They think of themselves as an extension of the larger Sunni Arab community. The killing of Prime Minister Hariri is another factor that made them feel very nervous. But the breaking point came in May 7, 2008, when Hezbollah, for the first time, used its weapons against Beirut, especially against the Future movement. That was the really breaking point between Hezbollah and the rest of the country, especially the March 14 and the Sunni community. Toppling the government of Saad Hariri also became one of the contentious points between them, especially that the Sunnis feel that Hezbollah, after toppling the government, chose for them a prime minister, as when they chose Mr. Mikati, and they called this a political coup. The military coup that they talked about was the toppling of the entering Beirut, and the political coup is when they toppled the government. Nasrallah called 2 weeks ago, he called for a constituent and assembly for Lebanon, which the Sunnis and the March 14 saw in it as redrawing of the political map in Lebanon, because it's calling to get away from the Ta'if and for a new power-sharing arrangement. And this put red lights in the situation in Lebanon. There's also a very important factor, which is the sense of empowerment that the Sunni community feels in Lebanon after the Arab Spring. They feel they are stronger, and they feel that they're not going to take anymore what Hezbollah has been doing for them for the last, they say, 20 years or 15 years. They speak now about northern Dahiya, which is in Tripoli, as facing the southern Dahiya, which for Hezbollah. So there is the balance of terror now. You have two Dahiyas. This is what they're talking about. And they blame the government. They say the Lebanese government has not been doing its job to protect us, so we have to protect ourselves. And they say the government has been playing the role of a PO box for the Syrian government. So basically that they see it as extension of the Syrian government. The Lebanese also, here comes the most important factor these days. The Lebanese are divided over the situation in Syria. The March 14 and the Sunni community in Lebanon, they're supporting the opposition in Syria, and they see that the government's policy of dissociating themselves as hypocritical. They say that when we support the Syrian people, they come and detain us, they harass us, but when Hezbollah supports the regime, they turn a blind eye. And the Syrians are not helping in the situation, because the daily shooting across the border, the kidnapping of people in the north, the harassment all the time on the border, this is creating a big problem, especially the accusations of arms smuggling. They accuse the Sunnis and the Future movement of sending money and arms and weapons and men to help the Syrian opposition. This is a very important subject, actually. The border, we can take it in question and answer. I will not go into detail, but I have some interesting things about it, and including the letter that the Syrian ambassador at the UN sent to the United Nations, accusing the Lebanese of sending arms to destabilize Syria, and actually saying that al-Qaeda is becoming a hub for al-Qaeda. And this is a very interesting subject, actually, we can talk about. The killing of the sheikh in Akkar also brought things to the brink, and we saw the violence in Beirut, in Tripoli. It spread to Beirut and Bekaa, and that's when people became very scared. And we saw for the first time kidnapping on sectarian basis between Alawis and Sunnis, and that was really the point where everybody was scared. They started calling for a dialogue. The president held a dialogue session at the palace, at Babda Palace. It was not attended by three major players: Nasrallah, Saad Hariri, and Ja'ja'. Saad Hariri and Nasrallah sent representatives, but Ja'ja' considered this a futile exercise, and he did not send anybody. During the dialogue, which was supposed to bring everybody together, the atmosphere was very tense, and a member of parliament of Hezbollah threatened that 1975 is going to be a picnic compared to today if we have a civil war. So the atmosphere was not that cordial, but in spite of that, the president presented a document, they're calling it the Babda document, and they approved it. Everybody approved the document. And the most important thing in the document, and the president said that in his interview with Al-Akhbar, is the call that Lebanon is telling the world we don't want to have safe haven in Lebanon. which I really believe maybe that was the main reason that the dialogue was held, just to put everybody on notice in Lebanon and to bring the other side, to make them say that we don't want to help the Syrians, we don't want to have safe havens in Lebanon. And the document was approved and was put out. The things as they are now, both sides are very still in their camps. Nobody believes that the dialogue has really improved the situation a bit. A friend of mine, I was talking to him in Beirut yesterday, and I said, so what do you think of the dialogue? What did it do? What did it achieve? And he said, it's an aspirin. I said, what do you mean? He said, it's a temporary relief and nothing more. So people don't have lots of hopes that things are going to improve. Lebanon probably will not descend into a full-blown civil war, but also it will not be in a good situation. It will remain. It's the temperature in Lebanon will rise regularly depending on the situation of the Syrian patient. The situation is very very much has an integral relationship with the situation in Syria. I don't see there's any improvement in the internal situation in Lebanon unless the situation in Syria changes very soon. And this also, I think, will be also depending on another regional factor, which is the Iranian nuclear issue, and how this will be handled in the next few months or weeks between the West, the international community, and Iran. In the meantime, Lebanon will be up and down, going between sporadic eruptions. Thank you.
Thank you, Amal. Hassan.
Actually, I'll start by picking up of where Amal has left. Thank you, Amal, actually, for relieving me from any need to lay the facts and provide any analysis of the facts, so I can actually fall back to a stream of consciousness that I'd like you to indulge me in. I'm going to talk about missed opportunities, about self-fulfilling prophecies, and about self-reinforcing models. And in order to do that, I'll start by being a little bit critical of what Amal has said when she referred to the Sunni community in Lebanon. I do not think that there is such a thing. There are many Sunni communities in Lebanon in the plural, but I do not see one. I fail to see what connection and what affinity and what similarity, just to talk about the north, there is between the Sunni middle class who lives in Tripoli, in Tel, where they enjoy, in addition to all the trimmings of comfort, an alternative music scene, actually a rap scene, and Bebet Tebeni, where we have destitute people whose sole ability to consume any kind of information and ideas comes from the support of a couple of supported places supported by money from the Gulf, and therefore Salafist in its orientation, or for that matter between the two and someone in Beirut who has a completely different orientation. I think we have here, talking about self-reinforcing models, we have here a fallacy that is born out of a political necessity of some time. We clearly all respect the legacy of the late Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri, and we view that legacy positively in many respects, but let us also be frank about it. What that legacy consisted of, in particular with regard to the Sunni community, is a certain homogenization of leadership. Homogenization of leadership along the lines that up until then, there has not been a national Sunni Lebanese leader. There has been many leaders in Lebanon, Sunni leaders, who are leaders of their communities, Beirut, Tripoli, Saida, and also a clear distinction between the urban leaderships in the plural and the rural leaderships in Akkar, in the Iqlim, in the Biqa. What we have in the Hariri experience is a leader who rose up to become a leader of all, but does not necessarily mean a unity or equality between all, and in the process eliminated a lot of institutions of diversity within the community and eliminated a lot of checks and balances between the leaders. So when Hariri dies, and much of the Sunni communities in Lebanon found themselves leaderless. The fact that Saad Hariri assumes the mantle of his father is clearly in large part due to an emotional desire to pretend that a Hariri legacy will continue, but also because of a lack of leadership across many of these communities all over the place. The reason I'm mentioning this because we engage in this self-reinforcing model that Lebanon is indeed a federation of communities and is not a nation state. I would propose to you that Lebanon was a conglomeration of communities back in 1920, and actually many of these communities rejected Lebanon, but they were forced into it. By 43, many of these societies and communities in their diverse ways entered into Lebanon Inc. of sorts, meaning a deal. But by the time the Civil War happened, and definitely after the Civil War, a common Lebanese core had already emerged. And 2005 really represents a manifestation of that. The 14th of March 2005 is the new Lebanon, the true Lebanon, the Lebanon that was not just vertically segmented, but had a horizontal continuity of sorts. The problem is that it did not include all the communities because we had one community in particular in Lebanon that was under occupation, and I do not mean Israeli or Syrian occupation. I mean under Iranian occupation, and continues to be. And let us be frank about it. I know that there is a lot of sensitivity here about the matter, but I really think it is time to move away from the diglossia that has characterized political discourse in Lebanon. Diglossia, for those of you who do not know, is a linguistic term that refers to the fact that some language, such as Arabic, is spoken one way at home, and one way is the public sphere. Greek is another such language, so German is another such language. In Lebanon, political discourse is diglossic. Within the community, we speak one language, we express one set of beliefs and one set of fears and one set of historical readings, and then when we step to the national level, we speak the more formal, the more polite, the more polished language of national unity to be, and we deplore the fact that we have communitarianism while actually we are attached to it at home. In the various communities, and again, the communities in question that I'm mentioning are not the so-called 17, they were never 17 in any case, but it is the many, many such small communities, because in addition to sectarianism on a religious basis, you have regionalism, and you have also political divisions that are as intense. So here is the problem of the self-reinforcing model. I'm mentioning this not because it is intellectually stimulating. I'm mentioning it because we have had a couple of moments in Lebanese history, recent Lebanese history, where we would have been able to transcend this fragmentation and to start with actually reifying the reality, reifying in discourse the reality on the ground that we had the emergence of a horizontally integrated Lebanese core. The moments were the liberation in the south in 2000, but any of you who were in Lebanon would notice that then actually it was the time I think Hekmi had won some big competition. If you flip the channels, you see some channels. Hekmi is a basketball team in Lebanon. If you flip the channels at that point, you will see that some channels had a lot of yellow flags of Hezbollah having liberated the south, and other channels had equally euphoric green flags of Hekmi having won the big competition. So if anything indicates schizophrenia in terms of the identity, that would be an example. But that was a moment that we missed. Another moment, which was also unfortunately, if you like, a partisan moment, was 2005. As I mentioned, much of the Lebanese population, actually it was in per capita probably one of the greatest events on planet Earth, that so many Lebanese were down the street demonstrating and effectively, peacefully, without a shot, forcing an occupation army out of Lebanon. But another segment of Lebanon did not participate. That was also a missed moment. And again, the way the events were read were so diametrically opposite. We had a third such opportunity with the victory of the Lebanese army at Nahr al-Barid. Another Syrian implantation, an attempt at derailing and completely destroying that burgeoning but problematic experience that was Lebanon post the Syrian withdrawal. Again, we did not capitalize on it. It could have been our national moment. The reason I'm mentioning this is since we have had, like Amal was describing, Lebanon is not going to be all right, but Lebanon is not going to devolve into civil war, and therefore what we will witness, unfortunately, is the continuing attrition of Lebanon. But here are the missed opportunities. Major missed opportunity also is in the fact that in terms of the discourse, another disagreement with Amal, and I promise you it's the last one.
It's okay, go ahead.
That Sunnis in Lebanon, whatever that is, and as I mentioned, meaning I do not see it as a unified bloc, see themselves as an extension of a wider context. That may be true for some, but I assure you it's not true for a majority, especially people are consumed locally. In any case, the importance of it is that Sunnis in Lebanon, again between the quotation mark, seem to have made, in the person of Rafiq Hariri as a leader, but actually he led only by reflecting an opinion among these many Sunni communities, seemed to have a choice of Lebanon first. And we seem to have had, over the past few years, an attempt on the part of leadership opposed politically to the leadership of Hariri and others, an attempt at denying that, and that denial might be a self-fulfilling prophecy of sorts. I'm not saying in terms of all of Lebanon, but definitely in terms of some marginal groups that actually proudly display the Syrian revolutionary flag, because the Lebanese flag means little for them for the simple fact that all the Lebanese governments, including those who they voted for, have neglected them for so long. So what we have here, we have really, again, in Lebanon today, I don't think there's not one single leader in Lebanon today who can claim to be a national leader. We have some great communal leaders. I literally, I can point to someone with integrity who had to pay the price. I'm talking about Samir Jaja here, who stands by his positions. There are many others like Samir Jaja, Musbah al-Ahdab in Tripoli, who has asserted actually a position that is absolutely of principle. I'm not going to talk about the leaders who are connected to the outside in one way or another. In any case, I'm not endorsing anyone, I'm simply highlighting. But beyond those who have certain national appeal, Samir Jaja, who has a very troubled history, has a national appeal nonetheless. Beyond those, what we really have in Lebanon is warlords and leaders of fiefdoms and leaders of regions and of a very narrow sectarian dimension. The end result of that, we do not have a project for Lebanon for the future, but we see projects around us that are very disastrous. We see a Syria collapsing into what would amount probably as Somalia, with Somaliland north of Lebanon in the form of an Alawi state maybe, and the rest in hell. Okay, and we can see how that can have a ripple effect into Lebanon. The end result of what I'm describing is that currently, indeed, it's a bleak picture, but the sad thing about it is that the assets that Lebanese society has, both in terms of the ability to conceive beyond it and in terms of the linkages that currently are there. I'm not saying about let us create a common Lebanese space. I argue that the common Lebanese space is there, but it is not reflected at the political level. And this is, I think this is the real tragedy of Lebanon.
Okay, thank you, Hassan. Very provocative, very interesting. Tony.
Yep. I'm going to try to jump off from what both Hassan and Amal have described in terms of the dilemmas or the targeting of the various Sunni communities and its fragmentation, and to sort of try to understand what is exactly triggering this. And you have both two forces that are trying to do this. Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria, obviously, and Hezbollah in Lebanon. And while the two the two sort of reasonings behind their actions are related, they are also very much separate in their calculus. Hassan spoke about the sort of this emergence of this Alawi enclave right now in northwestern Syria, which is on the northern border of Lebanon, and sort of a quick sort of look at the trajectory of the fighting in Syria in recent, especially in recent weeks. You see that this has all been intensifying around that enclave. So you see it in Homs, which is right north of Lebanon, and its countryside, and all the way up to the Turkish border, which is the other border that would border this Alawite enclave. So you have Turkey in the north and Lebanon in the south. There's a dilemma for the Assad regime because Lebanon has functioned as sort of an open sort of strategic depth of sorts for the Free Syrian Army and other opposition fighters that have been fighting the Assad regime. And this is why he has moved to make this kind of trouble in Lebanon. Specifically because the government of Lebanon, under Najib Mikati, the prime minister, and the president, Michel Sleiman, have both tried to sort of keep a low profile. Najib Mikati is a Sunni from Tripoli, so having this kind of problems in Tripoli is a big deal. It's an embarrassment. But what Assad was trying to do was to push them, to embarrass them further, to take a very sort of unambiguous stand in support of the Assad regime, and not this so-called policy of dissociation, whereby sort of Lebanon would try to remain neutral one way or another in this fight. So by pushing the buttons in places like Tripoli and in places like Arsal in the Bekaa, which is also a Sunni town, the Assad regime is trying to force the Lebanese government to come out outright in terms of its support for his regime. That's on a political level. On a tactical level, Assad wants to raise the cost of Tripoli's support for the opposition in Syria. So the idea is that you will be facing constant troubles and constant fighting until we try to cut off these lines of supplies. And indeed, the murder of the sheikh that Amal mentioned, the Sheikh Abdul Wahid, who was apparently very active in support of the Syrian revolution, was essentially assassinated by a hit squad. Now, interestingly, it wasn't Hezbollah who assassinated him directly, and it wasn't the Assad regime's forces who assassinated him directly. It was a hit commissioned by Hezbollah's allies in the Lebanese military, essentially. So this was a big blow, and they are trying now to cut off logistical supplies as much as possible. The Syrian army is making incursions, planting mines, kidnapping, shooting across the border, and so on, all to sort of disrupt this logistical pipeline, as it were, that's right on the border of the Alawite enclave. As far as Hezbollah is concerned, they too share the same problem. The other issue, however, for Hezbollah is that as much as it wants to safeguard the Syrian regime and protect it and ensure its continuity, there is obviously always a potential that this is not going to happen. I mean, and the position of the Syrian regime is growing. I mean, some say in recent weeks has grown more dire. How does Hezbollah deal with the aftermath of that? I mean, this is a logistical bridge for Hezbollah. Amal mentioned about the arms smuggling from Syria into Lebanon that Hezbollah has accelerated in recent weeks. Israeli intelligence has said pretty much the same. But if Hezbollah were to how does Hezbollah consolidate its position in Lebanon post-Assad? And this is how you start to understand politically how these events in the north and with the Sunni community have worked. Hezbollah has made sure that these kind of clashes did not move to beyond the north. So although Arsal is in the Bekaa, and the broader Bekaa is a Hezbollah stronghold, it hasn't spread beyond Arsal. When it moved to Beirut, briefly, the fighting moved to Beirut, it was quickly contained. Hezbollah and its allies in Lebanese military intelligence quickly moved in to secure sort of the end of the fighting, and that was that. Other than that, it was all concentrated in the north. Now, Hezbollah doesn't itself want to be directly in the spotlight of this fighting, so it has now subcontracted, as it were, or it's trying to hide behind the Lebanese army for it to do its dirty work, essentially. So you see, and allied security apparatuses. So you see a lot of those in general security, for instance. This is how the fighting in Tripoli started. It was somebody from general security who was allied with Hezbollah, the director, Abbas Ibrahim, and his local minion in Tripoli. And they set the trap that started the fighting in Tripoli. They have done incursions into Arsal, for instance, where they have fought with some of the sort of the families there as well. So they politically for Hezbollah, this intends to continue the fragmentation and the vacuum of leadership in the Sunni community on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's intended to paint the Sunni community or communities, although they are very diverse, as Hassan pointed out, to paint them as fanatical, bearded, armed, lawless, and pretty much against the state and against the army, sort of to put them in conflict with the army, with the state. And that will have political calculations as well in the upcoming elections. In 2013, parliamentary elections are coming up, and then 2014 is another presidential election. And Hezbollah wants to make sure to try to take as much advantage of this situation to consolidate its gain on the political system, tighten its grip on the state, and for that, he needs to have a weakened Sunni community, especially, and a weakened Hariri leadership as well. And this is sort of my overview of it, and I'm not going to take more time, so I'll take your Q&As and further discussion.
Great, thank you, Tony. Thanks to everybody for some very interesting remarks to get us started. Let me just follow up on Tony touched quite a bit on Syrian perhaps strategies and motivations in this crisis and the way Lebanon might figure in Syrian strategy. I think both Amal and Hassan in particular, and maybe Tony indirectly, believe that we can avert the worst in Lebanon, that civil war is not imminent or even likely, that the parties in Lebanon maybe don't have an interest in restarting the conflict to that level. But I wonder if you do, there are a lot of outside players in Lebanon, Iran and Syria most particularly, that have significant influence and capability to, and perhaps incentives to move the theater of attention and battle into Lebanon. So I'm wondering how you assess those, Syria's agenda in Lebanon in particular.
Actually, everybody in the March 14 camp believes that Syria is trying to change the subject in Syria and move the situation and the confrontation to Lebanon. And with doing that, first of all, they will bring back Lebanon to the 1970s and 80s, where it was the headache for the international community, and the sectarian conflict will relieve the regime in Syria from some of the pressures, especially from what they call as the arms smuggling and helping the opposition in Syria. This is a very serious fear among the Lebanese, that the Syrians at one point they're going to make more effort to try the Syrian regime and try to move the situation. The situation on the ground is such that the only party in Lebanon that can really have a civil war and do the civil war is the party that has the weapons, because Hezbollah is the only party that has the overwhelming power in Lebanon, and if there's a civil war, they are the only ones who can start it and can finish it, because the others are not armed. Now there are attempts at getting some arms from other groups, but it's small arms. It's not on the scale of Hezbollah's arms that are battle tested and they're overwhelming. So the party that really can decide now the fate of the civil war in Lebanon, whether we're going to slide on civil war, is the party that has the most power in Lebanon, not the others. And
John, let me add to that, because I do agree with what Amal is saying. The only party with command and control, the only party with an infrastructure for war, the only party with weaponry that is actually more powerful than the Lebanese army is Hezbollah. What we can see in Lebanon is a series of attritive conflicts here and there in order to rebalance the power, reconfigure the power in one way or another. But to talk about a full-fledged civil war, there has been a full-fledged civil war, and the war has been won. There's one party that is in charge, that has the weapons, that controls everything, and actually that toppled the regime by force without even firing a bullet, which is a testimony to its power. So to have a rehearsal, to have a rehash of what happened in 75, meaning a repeat of 75, is unlikely, for the simple fact you do not have two camps. You have one camp, and then you have a subject population.
One of the things, it's very fashionable, not just in the Syrian context, but also increasingly in the Lebanese context, to sort of talk about sort of the rise of Salafism or sort of Islamic Sunni extremism in particular, right? And I mean, I always sort of laugh when I hear that in the Lebanese context in particular. When you actually look at the actual power that these guys, even when they carry their weapons, right, and go into battle. I mean, the battle in Beirut recently, when was it? In April, was it, or early May? When they fought in the Beirut for about 7 hours against a tiny little Sunni faction that is allied with Hezbollah, right? So the fighting was in Tariq al-Jadidi, which is a sort of a pro-Hariri, pro-future movement bastion, right? And they have been brutalized in 2008 by Hezbollah. They were really, I mean, and they continued to be harassed by the Syrians proxies like the SSNP and Amal and Hezbollah, right? So when the fighting broke out, they blew up and they sort of went to the streets to attack this particular faction of his name is Shakir Berjawi, and he's allied with Hezbollah at this point. And it took them 7 hours to try to sort of root him out of that little tiny neighborhood, and he managed to, you know, military intelligence pulled him out in the end, and he managed to escape. But it just gives you an idea about the scale of the power and armament of these so-called big Sunni extremists in Lebanon. I mean, they've been fighting the Alawites, which is a tiny besieged minority in Tripoli, for years and years and years, and you can still see that there's not even a match in terms of power. The Alawites are better armed, better trained, and they have been able to hold them off. They're too fragmented, they're too weak, and they're not really properly trained to hold this kind of battle. So I don't see this idea of a civil war as at all feasible, let alone the idea of this big Sunni extremist, al-Qaeda emirate in the Lebanese north. I mean, I just find it farcical.
I wonder if everybody else can just comment on that issue of al-Qaeda and Salafism and the dangers of this more virulent form of Sunni extremism finding a serious base of operations in Lebanon, and how dangerous or worried we should be about it.
I'll just talk about Tripoli for a little bit, and Hassan is a better expert on this, but everybody is talking about the danger of the Sunni and Salafi explosion in Tripoli. And I talked to most of the politicians that I know in Tripoli for the last 2 weeks, and I read about the subject, and I talked to our people, and everybody tells me that the number of these Salafis in Tripoli is not more than 300 to 500 people. And this is not, a great number in any, in any confrontation. If you're going to have a confrontation with Hezbollah, these are 300. And when they have a demonstration, at the most, they have 500, 700 people coming to. So I think the issue is being used as exaggeration just to paint the Sunnis, and the Sunnis are upset. The majority of the Sunnis, I know Hassan doesn't like me to say the Sunnis, the majority of the Sunnis are upset about that because they feel there's a campaign to paint them as al-Qaeda, as terrorists, just to justify anything that is going to be done for them, because they feel that something is being planned against this community. But these people in Tripoli, they are a small minority. They are not that important. In any battle, they can't last for a couple of hours if the army or if Hezbollah or anybody is going to face them. So it's really not a major threat. It's just being used as a ploy to just justify any policy that they're trying to take against Tripoli. There has always been some Salafi elements in every community, but it's a small element, it's very contained, and it's not really a big danger, but it's blown out of proportion.
John, I'm not concerned about the young man in Bebet Tabeni and other areas in North Lebanon who grew their beard the Salafi way and who shout Allahu Akbar at a frequency of, 50 times per minute or whatever. They're not the concern. And for that matter, let me clearly state, they have the right to do what they do. They have the right to express themselves. They have the right to dress the way they want to dress. Their women in niqab have the right, if they so choose, to dress in niqab. It is none of our business to tell people how to live their lives. This is not the concern. But let's not forget that Ziad Jarrah, the pilot of the fourth plane that did not make it to Washington, D.C. On September 11th was Lebanese. He was Lebanese from a progressive, secular Sunni family from the Beqa that is left-leaning, that is definitely not Salafist. The fear, when we speak about al-Qaeda, let us define what we're talking about. If we're talking about this ideology and methodology that can cause young people to pay for their own ticket and fly from Tunisia all the way to Baghdad in order to kill innocent people, Lebanon is as subject to that risk as any other place on earth, including the United States. If we're talking about any type of organization, not only is it not there, actually it is impossible for it to take root the way it took root in places such as Yemen or Somalia or elsewhere, because the ingredients for that, both socially, culturally, demographically, etc., are not there. So indeed, it is a smokescreen. It is an attempt at creating a false balance between, okay, so you have Shia weapon in the form of this Iranian machine, Iranian forward position that consists of weaponry that effectively can arm 6 Lebanese armies. And then you have those few people that we see on the screen carrying machine guns and shouting Allahu Akbar. Okay, shouting a lot more power to them, shouting Allahu Akbar, that's their right. But carrying weapon and threatening, even without a word, even without carrying weapon, toppling a government by threatening that if a government is not toppled, we're going to burn the land, that's not all right.
Do you mind if I add
go
one
ahead.
thing?
Yeah.
I think also using Al-Qaeda in particular is a strategy, is the Syrian strategy of branding anybody who's against as Al-Qaeda, and using it in Lebanon is a message to the United States, because they know this is what the United States is scared of more. So they're telling them we are still in your camp and these are our common enemies, so let's fight this together. So this
Right.
is